We'll get to ads in a moment. I want to talk about user growth first because that was the real bright spot. You saw an increase in users year over year, 24%, the biggest increase since 2016. What do you think specifically was driving that? Is it all virus related?
Well, thanks for having me, Emily. We were thrilled with the DAU growth that we delivered in Q1. This is an accumulation of a ton of work we've done on the product over years to make it easier for people to find what they're looking for and to make sure they can trust the information that they see. We were having a good quarter from a DAU perspective in January and February, and then things really took off in March as the pandemic became global and many more people flocked to the service to find out what was happening, what people were talking about, sometimes around COVID-19 and sometimes just because of it, where shelter in place required people to make connections and start conversations in different ways than they had before.
Meantime, Ned, shares are down still almost 8% now on this color that you gave around advertising. You said advertising down 27% in the last few weeks of March, and you're seeing similar trends in April. I spoke to your counterpart from Facebook, and they said April was flat, though March was down. How concerned should investors be about this, and do you expect that to continue into May?
Well, we actually didn't talk about April on our call. We talked about March and how we really saw two different timeframes during the March quarter. One was from January 1st to March 10th, where we were off to a good start, especially in the United States. We had a really strong Super Bowl, and lots of great things were happening all around the world for us. And then from March 11th to 31st, we saw ads revenue down 27%. Remember, our business is one that really benefits from events, both our customers' events when they launch a new product or service, and the events that bring people to Twitter, where advertisers come to connect with their customers around those topics and events. And so as events were pushed out and canceled, that definitely had some impact on us. The second issue that we saw is we are very brand focused in our advertising. Brand advertising tends to be harder to measure and sometimes is less resilient during a more constrained economic environment like the one in which we find ourselves today. This is a reminder of how important our work around direct response advertising is and why we've elevated that work to be our #1 company priority.
So what can you tell us then about April and what you're seeing? If Facebook says it's flat, I mean, you have to be able to share some insights into what we can expect, going forward.
Well, I'd give you two thoughts about this time frame right now. The first one is it's incredibly dynamic, and for us to discern patterns and articulate them publicly may perhaps put people in a position where they're making judgments on things that are still anecdotes and not data points from which we can draw straight lines. So we want to be careful about that. But secondly, we think that March 11th to March 31st timeframe really gives people a good glimpse for what it's been like for us to operate in this environment. We already in that timeframe saw advertisers start to pivot their campaigns. You saw Intuit, for example, where instead of advertising QuickBooks, they were advertising the GoFundMe that they were doing for small businesses. You saw Hyundai, where instead of trying to sell cars on Twitter, they were advertising a program where they were helping their borrowers who had bought cars and perhaps had lost their jobs. We've been working really hard to help advertisers make this pivot, and some of it happens really quickly, and there are other parts of it that just take longer to play out.
So let's talk then about users and what the fact that the Olympics are being pushed back. Live sports aren't happening. If that continues to happen through the second half of the year, does that then hurt the user growth, the healthy user growth that we've seen?
Well, we definitely benefit from the topics and events that bring people to Twitter. Sometimes those are scheduled things like the Olympics or March Madness or other events that can't happen or are delayed because of this global pandemic. But then there are things like The Last Dance, which so many of us are watching on Sunday nights right now, or the concert that was on television all over the world a couple of weeks ago, which are bringing people together despite this global pandemic, or in some cases because of it, and that are great audience opportunities for us and ultimately give us the chance to have a larger audience that we can work with for much longer periods of time to show them all the other great things that are on Twitter. So we try to think about this much more about the long term than about any particular event and how that might affect audience growth.
Now, leading into this, there were some issues with the leadership, concerns about leadership at Twitter, and you had some activist investors calling for Jack Dorsey to potentially reconsider running both Twitter and Square at the same time. I didn't hear anyone on the call actually mention this situation. So I wonder, given the environment, does Dorsey get a sort of pass on that? I know you've been really supportive of him every time I've asked you about his double roles, but curious if this environment changes the thinking on that.
Well, we're off to a good start with our two new directors who joined us about a month ago. And there really are no changes to how Jack leads the company or how the leadership team works together. What we've seen in the last couple of months as the company has adapted to this shelter-in-place environment is incredible resilience from everybody on the team. We've talked for a while about wanting to decentralize our team and making sure that we're not too reliant on offices when we are hiring people at the company. And we have proven over the last couple of months that we can ship code, that we can maintain the service amidst this surge in usage, that we can help advertisers pivot their campaigns. And a lot of this is because of Jack's leadership and how he inspired us to close the offices early in order to prioritize safety, and now to prioritize revenue product as our #1 company priority, because that's what's going to help us help advertisers in a more resilient way than we can today.
Meantime, we've got a critical presidential election coming up that nobody seems to be talking about right now. Even in my Twitter feed, it's all coronavirus all the time. You guys took a bold step and decided not to take any more political ad dollars. Do you have any regrets about that in this environment?
When you make principled decisions around things like that, that voice on a political event ought to be earned and not bought. You really don't look back from those things with regret. You look back with pride. When I look at the Democratic primaries in the United States and how there was terrific conversation on Twitter amongst the candidates, about the candidates, from the candidates, it was great to know that all of those voices were earned and not bought. And we think that helps the conversation. It builds trust with the people who use the service. By the way, it doesn't mean that an ad doesn't serve. It just means that it's not a political ad that people see. Remember, we mentioned that during the 2018 midterms in the United States, it was about $3 million of ad revenue from political ads. So this wasn't a lot of money for us in that time frame, regardless. But that was a principled decision we feel really good about.
Last quick question. You know, you mentioned how well everyone's been working from home. Jack Dorsey seems to be a big proponent of it. Quickly, could working from home become the new normal for Twitter employees, or do you actually have a plan to bring folks back to the office?
Well, we don't yet have a plan to bring people back to the office. Given the environment, we're going to have to take it as it comes and adapt to these new health regulations all around the world. We're going to prioritize the safety of our team, minimizing spread of the virus, and service continuity, and try to be really thoughtful about how we open our offices, just as we were thoughtful about how we closed them in early March, and being one of the leaders to do that early on. But this is definitely going to change how people work. I suspect not just at Twitter, but across the economy. And we've been thrilled with how resilient our team has been amidst all the adversity that we've navigated these last couple of months.